Good morning. Today we are going to talk about bird species identification using deep learning algorithm. For this very interesting subject, I'll be walking through a set of topics that describes the problem statement we have at hand, existing research works and methodologies used previously to overcome this challenge, and the approach that we are going to study. Then we'll evaluate our proposed approach and how it performed in comparison to the data we chose and previous studies. And finally, I'll talk about what we learned from the whole process and some future work that we can build upon on our study. So let's start. So, as we know, we have an abundance of flora and fauna in the world, and birds are a major part of that ecosystem. Today, there are more than 10,000 species of birds present across the globe. These species can be identified with the slightest variation in size, form, shape, color patterns, wings, their habitats, and their sound calls. Now, given these enormous volume of features, it would be difficult for any single person to be able to identify all the species correctly without any assistance, which usually comes in forms of handbooks, picture guides, or audio guides. I myself had the opportunity to interact with some renowned ornithologists who gave me insightful information of the importance of birds in our ecosystem and the lack of that information amongst the common man, which in fact enthused me to become an avid bird watcher myself. With that in mind, I chose this topic to identify bird species using deep learning algorithms, which will not only give me a chance to study and understand the workings of neural networks and deep learning algorithms, but also help me develop a platform which will cater to a larger population, including but not limited to researchers, ornithologists, and budding bird watchers, and further use this platform to create awareness of the importance of birds and do our bit, however small or large, in protecting them and our ecosystem. So, we talk about the existing work that has been done in this field. Definitely, there have been bird classification tools and applications that have been the center for many researchers to identify the species and create awareness about the different species of the birds and their importance in the ecosystem. Many of these researchers have been focused on the process of identifying birds with the use of machine learning algorithms applied to various forms of data, including features, audios, videos, and images. As the existing classification models use deep learning, where artificial human inspired neural networks and algorithms learn from an enormous volume of data. We'll discuss some of these approaches in short, which are identification based on audio data using CNN framework, which classified birds based on their audio call. The major drawback of this model was the presence of the noises in the data that can be attributed to natural sounds for the birds, fauna, insects, or other objects, even human interferences. Another approach identified birds based on color features, where features were extracted from unconstrained images to classify birds using color segmentation algorithms. It computed histogram bins. The major drawback for this one was that many species had similar color features and patterns that resulted in the model misclassifying them. Researchers also researched classifying the bird species based on DNA barcoding from the DNA collected from hair, blood, feces of birds. Although the results were useful, the benefits were only limited to the scientific community, as the instruments or the data required for sampling are not available to the common man or avid bird watchers like myself. Apart from the deep learning algorithms, feature extraction and dimensionality reduction techniques were also used to classify birds, which use the ratio of distance between the eye and the base of the beak, as well as the distance between the breadth of the beak. SVM and KNN algorithms were used, where SVM gained an 84% accuracy, while KNN scored about 67% accuracy. Another deep learning approach was to use post normalized CNN on images where post locates and normalizes to find the features. It resulted in an accuracy level between 65 to 75%. With these background researches available, we move to our proposed approach, that is, to use a convolutional neural network using PyTorch on the dataset obtained containing 200 bird species. The CNN algorithm will use a ResNet 18 pre trained model for our classification model, which uses a 2D convolutional layer. Briefly, we'll talk about the dataset, model architecture, algorithm design, hyperparameter tuning, species classification, and finally we'll evaluate the model and have a code walkthrough. For the dataset, we use the Caltech UCSD Birds 200 called CUP 200 2011 dataset, which included 11,788 images, 200 bird species, 15 part locations, 312 binary attributes, and one bounding box. In the process of data visualization, we develop a general understanding of the data and check ways to impute the data, if required, to increase the number of images available for the training of the data. We'll be using a convolutional neural network algorithm to train on the 200 bird species from the Caltech UCSD bird dataset. So CNN has two components, feature extraction and classification. It consists of four layers. Convolutional layer, extracting visual features. Each neuron unit is only connected to a small number of neurons in the previous layer. The activation layer, to compress values into range, defines how the weighted sum of input is transformed into an output from a node in any layer. Pooling layer reduces the number of neurons, that is, the size of feature maps, which makes the computation faster as the training parameters are reduced. And the fully connected layer, to connect a neuron from one layer to every neuron in another layer. The proposed algorithm uses a Con2D class from PyTorch as a 2D convolutional layer. A matrix of kernel of weights slides over 2D data and performs element-wise multiplication on the current input data in that kernel. The result is then summed into a single output pixel. For our dataset, as the image consists of RGB values, the 2D convolution occurs individually for each of the three color channels, and the respective results are added together to obtain the final output. The algorithm uses a ResNet 18 pre-trained model from PyTorch for training the model and classifying the images. The ResNet 18 framework has 18 deep layers and uses the activation function ReLU, that is the rectified linear unit, and batch normalization. We use 20 epochs, 256 batch size, and an Adam optimizer with a learning rate of 0.001 to obtain a high frequency and accuracy and a better trained classification model. The training model is now fed the dataset to classify the birds, which follows the process of taking into account multiple features such as shape, size, body, color patterns, etc. Features are extracted from multiple layers of the network by a deep network of conventions, and the aggregated classification characteristics are transferred to the classifier, and the result is the identified species. Now we obtain the overall performance and validation accuracy of our trained model on our validation data set and plot the accuracy and loss versus number of epoch graphs using the matplotlib libraries. From these graphs, we can say that our model does not overfit or underfit the data and has a good generalization gap. However, the gap could have been smaller given that we had more data to train the model on. We finally test our model on our test dataset and obtain an accuracy of 94.06%, which, when compared to the existing researchers, is a good accuracy that we set to achieve. We'll quickly go through the code to see how the aforementioned process was implemented. We use a sample code from a Jovian which uses a CNN model with ResNet 18 using PyTorch. We use Torch and Torch Vision libraries to load and transform our data into tensors. The first part of the code is to divide the dataset into train and test datasets. We use the library to visualize the data and see that there are 200 species of the birds. We also see examples of the bird species that are there, like the African firefinch, American kestrel, red-faced cormorant, etc. Then we divide our training dataset into training and validation dataset so that the validation dataset will act as the unseen data to validate the trained model. Using a batch size of 256, we divide the data into train, val, and test. And we see the whole matrix of the training dataset that is available to us. Now we define the convolutional neural network. As we mentioned, we'll use a Con2D with a max pooling layer for the ResNet 18 CNN model with a kernel size 3, stride of 1, and padding 1. We also use GPU so that the processing is faster since we have a GeForce GTX 1650 available with us. Now, having defined our model, if we were to validate our validation data set on this, we would get an accuracy about of 1%. Now we will train the model. We'll use number of epochs equal to 20 using Adam Optimizer and a learning rate of 0.001. We can see for each epoch, the gradient descent is decreasing gradually, and we see a higher increase in the validation accuracy. Plotting the graphs for accuracy versus number of epochs and loss number versus number of epochs, we can see that our model does not underfit or overfit the data and gives a good validation accuracy. And now we finally test our model on the testing data and get an accuracy of 94.06%. So finally, we can conclude that we successfully developed and trained a classifier model to predict bird species with an accuracy of 94.06%. We used Python and explored different libraries like PyTorch and Matplotlib and used deep learning algorithms for our classification model. We used the Caltech UCSD COB 200 2011 dataset that had 200 species with 11,788 images, with totaling various characteristics such as shape, size, color pattern, etc. We also compared existing researches done to classify birds based on different types of data. Not only this process enabled me to practically implement and understand the concepts of pattern recognition and machine learning, it also helped me broaden the horizon of knowledge in the field of ornithology, environmental sciences, and how technology can play its part in protecting the elements of nature. Some future work that can be built upon the study is comprehensive data set of the species from around the world to train more accurate model to help identify different mutations occurring in the existing species or new species because of climate and ecosystem change, and graphical user interface model for researchers and avid bird watchers to increase the ease of use. The penultimate aim of the project is and was to create awareness and protect the rare, endangered, and threatened species and understand their biotic component in the environment and do our bit in saving the environment and its elements. Thank you.